right, you want to get going here? Are we on?
There we are. Boy, we got a packed house. About 150 people in here at Town Hall. Out in the hallway. Another 250 on Zoom. Anyway, good morning, Truckee. Yeah. So good morning. Just look outside. We do live in paradise. It's good morning for all of us being back here, of course. Good morning. We survived the pandemic, I think, and everything's looking good. So it's nice to be here. It's been 2 years, as you all know. You may remember I had a hair when we started this in my mind. And so here we are. So I know there's a bunch of folks that are gotten used to staying at home and staying in their PJs. And so there's a lot of you out there. I can picture Ted Owens right now. He's in his PJs, hopefully, sitting on a couch in Searville.
I would hate to picture Ted Owens.
That's right, yeah. Ernie says he'd hate to picture anything else. Searville guy's probably smoking a cigarette, doing, what you do, but we're here. He's there, you're all out there, and we appreciate you being here. So, and you can watch this at any time by someplace down here.
Truckee.com.
Truckee.com. So you'll hear Lynn Saunders briefing me. She's got me wired here. So, and you can watch it over and over. It's pretty good. I think you may want to watch it, 3 or 4 times during the month. So, in case you're new in town or forgotten, I'm Jim Porter, and my humor has not gotten any better, obviously. So, but you're not going to have me long to kick around here. So, our sponsors: Tall Forest Health System, Auerbach Engineering, Dixon Realty, JK Architecture Engineering, NV5, Porter Simon, Tall Truckee Community Foundation, Tall Truckee Media, Sierra Sun, Moonshine Inc., 101.5, Town of Truckee, the great town of Truckee, and the Truckee Tall Airport District. All right? We have a committee that puts this on, and we are always looking for more committee members, and it's the heavy lifting is with the chamber and Lynn Saunders over there, with Ruth Garrissey, Carolina Pacheco, and Melissa Williams. And we have Kelly Cutler from CAT, the Contractors Association, Mayumi Elegado from Moonshine Inc. If you haven't seen a recent story in Moonshine Inc., it was on Squaw Valley, formerly Squaw Valley, Palisades, Tahoe, and it's a story, a historical piece focused on Shirley of Shirley Canyon. It's really cool. Yeah, somebody had a whole binder of photographs and stories going way back, and so you ought to read that. Moonshine Inc. Ernie Grossman, Man About Town, is here. Oh my God, Don Rogers from the Sierra Sun just walked in. He is cool. Gerald Herrick, Fire Department Board. Tony Lashbrook, you all know Tony, he's here. Deb Ryan's right here from the Community Foundation. And we already talked about Ted Owens. He's not here. So thanks to Rory at Tahoe Truckee Media and for the town for hosting this event here at Town Hall. And if you can stay afterwards, in fact, you Zoom people may want to come down and help. We're going to have to reconfigure the tables and chairs so that we'll need lots of bodies. So all of you that are on Zoom within, say, 20 miles, maybe you could hustle down here and help us. And who put the food together? And I just want to thank somebody. Is that Chamber? Thank you. Ruth, yep. There she is in the back, yeah. Do we have raffles later?
We do.
We do, okay, good. All right. So let's go around the room and introduce ourselves, and if you dare, your affiliation. And I'm going to start with a special guest, Rob.
Rob McCarthy, McCarthy Signs.
Rob McCarthy, McCarthy Signs, yeah.
Brenda Stark, Chase International.
All right.
Chamber Ambassador.
Chamber Ambassador, great.
Tony Lashbrook, interested citizen.
Interested citizen. Interesting citizen. Ernie?
Ernie Grossman, retired.
Retired.
Bill Kenny, Tahoe Truckee Brokers.
All right.
Valerie Greaves, Balance Holistic Health Spa.
Hi, Valerie. Yeah.
Kevin Solomon, Sierra Community House.
Kevin?
Hi, Sienna Schneekloot, also from Sierra Community House.
Cool.
Chris Bennett, Norwood Construction.
Good. Who's in the back there?
Don Rogers, you already introduced me.
Don Rogers. Yeah. And who's in the back over here? Yeah, you. Yeah.
Bob Ford, a retiree.
Oh, yeah. Good. Hi, Bob.
Ethan Berber,
Heath.
business attorney at Waterside.
Ethan Bernberg.
Susan Jack Bosby, Leonard 5, Communication Network.
Oh, Susan.
Deborah Ann, Truckee Community Foundation.
Tony Commendatory, Aegis Insurance Market.
Tony Commendatory.
Rachel Ledke with Charles Schwab.
All right, Rachel. Charles Schwab. Anybody else? Think we got? Okay. You folks on Zoom, go ahead and start making the rounds, and we'll watch you introduce yourselves. Or maybe we don't do that. So we'll do questions after each speaker. We have two speakers and different topics, so we'll do questions after each and let you know that. If you have any questions you want to put them on Zoom, you can, or you can put them in the chat. And we'll probably start with our questions with the folks here. They're already raising their hands. They got a lot of things to ask about. And then we'll get to the Zoom people. So here we go. Starting the program. First speaker. So Governor Gavin, who I personally like and know quite well, I know not everybody feels the same way, signed a whopping 770 bills, which actually is pretty normal in last year, which means a lot of new laws went into effect January 1st, most of them January 1st. With us this morning to highlight some of these new laws is Ethan Bernberg, attorney with Porter Simon. God, that sounds familiar. Simon, I know that name. Ethan joined Porter Simon in 2019. He's like a 10-year lawyer, so he's had a lot of experience, has licenses in most of the West Coast states, it seems to me, including Nevada and Colorado and Virginia. He's an AV-rated attorney, which is the highest level that you can get in the profession, which not many of our comrades have this, but we both do, and I just slipped that in. And he's 2022 Northern California Super Lawyer, which is awarded to 5% of the attorneys in the state. And I got to win this for 1%. Or not. Ethan's experience is extensive and diverse. He's really good. I'm trying to retire and doing a pretty good job of it finally. And I found that when I tell my clients, you know, I'm retiring, and I fully expect them all to go, oh, no, Jim, please, you gotta just do it for me. You gotta hang in there. And no, not a single one. They all go, okay, good. Who do I talk to? And so they talk to Ethan or some of the other folks over at Porter Simon. He's spoken on several occasions to Good Morning Truckee and the First Tuesday Breakfast Club and giving an update on the law. So please welcome Ethan Bernberg.
All right, good morning. Jim, thank you very much for that introduction, particularly your ability to hold off on trying to one-up me on every single one of my credentials. Make sure this works. Let's try. Yes, all right. Okay, 2022 California update. We didn't do one last year, so I'm going to dig into 2021 as well. Jim mentioned 770 laws, I believe. Not going to touch anywhere close to that many. We don't have that kind of time. We are going to talk about a few laws here that I thought you'd find interesting. First, AB 5, classification of employees and independent contractors. There's some new updates that have been going on in that controversial law since 2020, so I'm going to talk about those. Talk about housing issues, both locally and statewide. New law that just came in 2022 about secret settlements in the corporate world, and then a few other laws, mental health in schools, and an update on the Bacon Law, which was a voter-backed initiative, Proposition 12 from 2018. All right, classification of employees. So what we're talking about here is that when you're running a company, you have individuals that work for you, you need to decide to classify them between employees or independent contractors. For a long period of time, we have what was called the Borello test. That was pursuant to a California case, and generally, employers were able to find out, we were able to balance those factors and have independent contractors, what we're commonly known as 1099ing folks that maybe don't work for you every single day. Then the case called Dynamex came down from the California Supreme Court and changed that whole standard. This is now a new gold standard, I'd call it, which is the ABC test, standing for A, B, and C, 3 prongs inside that case that came out, and then this legislature grabbed the Dynamex case and this new test and enacted AB5. Now, if some of this sounds familiar, it's because I talked about it in 2020 when this first law came out. And I mentioned that time it was going to be controversial. It was going to be difficult. One of the examples I used, and it still works today, is that if you own a painting company around Lake Tahoe and you have a lot of jobs that come in, but you don't have enough employees for it, but you know a fair amount of painters that can handle the job. So you call your friends and colleagues and you go out and get the work done. You pay those individuals for their time. The customers are happy. Pretty much everyone across the board is happy. You can no longer 1099 those folks as independent contractors and still be in compliance with AB5. The general idea behind that, without spending too much time in it, is that because you're running a painting company and those folks are painters, you're too close together. So AB5 says if you use the ABC test, those folks are not going to make it as independent contractors. Instead, they should be classified as employees. Why does that matter? It matters because employees get a lot more benefits. They're entitled to workers' comp, unemployment insurance, paid sick leave. Also, as the employer, you need to pay into a lot of programs if you have those employees in the state. There's a huge fiscal component here, and that's why this law is so controversial still to this day. Now, this law was directed primarily at the rideshare industry and the delivery service industry. So basically Uber and Lyft. What happened right when it came out, when they knew it was going to be passed, Uber and Lyft said, we're not going to follow it. It shouldn't pass at all. Legislature still passed it. And then Uber and Lyft said, thanks, we're not going to follow it. So the Attorney General of California sued Uber and Lyft and other companies that operate in that space. And that was joined by some city attorneys in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and San Diego. Uber lost. The federal court said, no, you need to reclassify all of your drivers as employees. Uber and Lyft's response to the federal court order was, thanks very much, we're not going to follow that either. And we're going to go to the voters. You might recall Proposition 22 came down in November 2020, in which Uber and Lyft were now exempt from AB5. So the voters approved that proposition. That made them exempt from the law. And that's a good transition to kind of what this whole law is all about, or at least how do you figure out if it's applicable to you? First, you look at your occupation and your business industry. Right when this law came out, certain industries were exempt, such as marketing professionals, travel agents, attorneys, doctors, accountants. And again, this was directed at a certain set of workers, pretty much the gig economy. So the whole idea here, or what employers were struggling with, is do I have to deal with this law or am I exempt? And that's when you look at your business and your industry. If you were not exempt, and therefore you had to deal with this new law, you started fighting for an exemption. And that's why we have these new exemptions that recently come out and why I'm talking about it today. AB 2257 from September of 2020, that handled the freelancer situation. So you might recall again, moving back to 2020 when this law came out, part of this law was if you are a freelance journalist, a photographer, you work for publications, if you did 35 or more articles or submissions, you needed to now be an employee. That caused a big problem. The LA Times made a big deal out of it, saying they weren't going to hire certain folks, they were going to lay off certain folks, they were not going to allow themselves to have so many employees. There were also freelance journalists who had a big problem with it. They liked being independent contractors. They didn't like the idea that because of this law, they might not get as much work. This was the push and pull on the law that you would see in the public before it was enacted. And now, as of today, they got rid of those 36 articles. So that's now removed. If you're a freelance journalist or someone in that realm, you're now exempt. LA Times, New York Times, those types of publications and media outlets don't need to worry about AB5 in the state of California. AB 1561, that just came out this year in 2022, clarified a few areas such as the insurance industry, saying that claims administration and third-party administrative work is now exempt. There's a lot of work in that space, and they figured out, do we have to make these people employees if they're just handling claims in the insurance space? You don't anymore. They also clarified that the exemption will apply to manufacturer home salespersons, And then AB 1506 came in, also January 1, 2022, is when it became effective. And that put mail carriers underneath the Borello test, again, the old test, what's easier for employers to classify them as independent contractors, until January 1, 2025. All right, so some takeaways here. Again, if you don't know about this law yet, and you run a company, you need to know about it. So that's the first thing you got to do. Even if you don't run a company and you're just an employee, you should also know about it because it can affect your rights. You need to look at your relationships, who you're hiring, who you're working with, and you need to audit those and take a look at it. Make sure you're classifying employees and independent contractors appropriately. Number one question I always get is, how many people are getting hit for this? Who just ignored this, just keep 1099ing people even though they're not supposed to, and what's the penalty? I personally haven't had anyone call my office and say, I now got a letter from the state and I'm in trouble, what do I do? But Governor Newsom has millions and millions, I think it was 20 million in 2020, same extent if not more in 2021, although I think with COVID things changed a bit in the budget. But there is money there to enforce this. I think it'd be naive to think that they're just ignoring it after passing this law and after all this controversy. And again, it continues to come up as we're seeing these exemptions that come into play even this year, and I'm sure we'll continue to see more next year. So my best guess is that when someone gets unhappy and maybe a lawsuit is filed, maybe it's a wage and hour claim, maybe they feel like they didn't get treated correctly, something of that nature, perhaps then they figure out, oh, I was also classified incorrectly under this new law AB5. I'm going to throw out that claim. I'm going to call the state. I want them to start an investigation. Again, I'm speculating because I don't have any personal knowledge, but just to kind of address probably one of the main questions I get about AB5 and enforcement. Bottom line here is understand this law. If it really affects you, sit down and audit your relationships. If you have to make a change from independent contractors to employees, do it correctly. All right, that's enough in the corporate world for now. On to housing. Folks, short-term rental is still a thing. The fad has not faded away yet. Despite everything that's going on, we're still talking about short-term rentals. I think we will in the future as well. And in fact, tonight, the Truckee Town Council is going to have a second reading of a new short-term rental ordinance. It's expected to pass, and I touched on a few areas here that have been deliberated previously that the town of Truckee has now developed inside their ordinance that will be, again, read for the second time tonight when the town council meets. So what's going on here? First, inside Truckee, some of the pieces that it's going to happen with STRs. We're going to cap registration certificates townwide at 1,255. There's going to be a 1-year waiting period after a property sells before it's eligible to be registered as an STR. The ordinance seeks to phase out STRs both in multifamily units and accessory dwelling units. Town council has asked the town to develop guidelines in a manner that incentivizes new workforce housing. And the wait list has not started yet. I think the wait list is something that we hear the most about. And again, from the town's perspective and what they've been telling everyone is it has not started yet. Again, this ordinance hasn't actually passed yet. So I'm going to go quickly through it because once it passes, you're going to hear a lot more about it and how it's going to be implemented. But the general idea is the same as what's happened in Placer County, which has already been enacted. Placer County went effective last week. Their moratorium on short-term rentals also ended at the end of March, whereas here in Truckee, the moratorium goes till mid-June. So we have more time here before we actually need a new ordinance. But the idea is basically draw a line between what's happened in the past of STRs and what's going to happen in the future. There's going to be a certain priority period where those who've already had permits are going to be able to apply. Perhaps those that didn't need permits because they didn't need to comply with that law under the old ordinance but now do, they'll also have a priority period. And they'll apply, and if they meet the criteria, they'll get those permits. And then after that priority period, everybody else can then apply. As long as we're under the cap here in Truckee at 1255 or what is 3,900 in Placer County, they're going to process those applications. So again, the wait list comes into play because if they hit the cap, there's going to be a wait list that's started. These things will roll out every year, or probably in the middle of the years, they'll look at permits and see how many are available. This is one of the many things locally that's going on here to try to deal with the California housing crisis. That's local. Let's talk about statewide. Statewide, what we're seeing is a lot of HOA movement. Why are the HOAs doing a lot more work than they used to do? Primarily two reasons. One, there's new statutes, I'm just about to talk about. And two, there was a new case that just came down in August 2021 that just reinforced the law that was already on the books, but I think a lot of people didn't know about it. And when that case came out, all the HOAs decided they needed to start taking some action, or at least a lot of the HOAs that I've seen across the state. So let's talk about the statute. First off, AB 3182 amended Civil Code 4740, and what it did is it added Civil Code 4741. All right, what are we talking about here? Okay, you live in a neighborhood. That neighborhood, using legal terms, is called a common interest development under California law. The acronym is CID. Then there's this whole set of statutes, usually in the Civil Code, or most of them are in the Civil Code, called the Davis-Stirling Act. And if you've done anything at the HOA level or participated in any of those meetings, you're going to know what the Davis-Stirling Act is. So it's got these set of codes, the California Civil Codes. And here we're amending them. Part of the reason of the Davis-Stirling Act and what it does, it tells HOAs what you can and can't do. One thing it does do is it says associations can govern common interest developments. So in other words, your HOA can govern your neighborhood if you have that set up. So the legislature changes some of the laws here. I think this was last year. I can't really read the slide from here, but I believe it was 2021 where this came into play. And new Civil Code 4741 says, in your CC&Rs, in your governing documents, you can no longer have any provisions that effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the rental or leasing of any separate interest. What does that really mean? It means you can't prohibit leasing. We can't have homes left empty. You cannot have that in your governing documents. Again, California housing shortage, legislature's trying to help with that. However, there's some carve-outs, as there always are. And the provisions restricting rentals are unreasonable and unenforceable unless, one, they prohibit rentals for 30 days or less, or two, they limit the number of rental homes in the community to 25% or less. So let's talk about that second one. Let's say you have 100 homes in your neighborhood. Well, if you restricted renting to 25 or 50 homes, you're fine. If you restricted renting to only 15 homes out of that 100, well, then you're going to break that 25% threshold. That's no longer legal. If you have something inside your CC&Rs that says we don't rent out homes, I don't think that's really an issue here locally, but certainly across California it is. That's why this law came into play. That's no longer allowed. If you don't get rid of those and amend those appropriately by July 1, 2022, you can be subject to civil penalties from the state of California. The last part here, though, is probably most important. The legislature saw an ability for this law to maybe be interpreted incorrectly, used incorrectly, whatever the reason was. They had a specific subsection that says it's not unreasonable or enforceable unless it prohibits, or it is, unreasonable, unless it prohibits rentals for 30 days or less. What they're talking about here is short-term renting. They're saying, look, we need to have long-term rentals. You need to allow leasing. However, HOAs, you can still restrict 30 days or less. You can restrict the short-term rental. With any law I'm talking about here, and anything at all, you have to apply it to your specific circumstances. So here I'm going to touch on a few other things that's inside this law, but I just want to make sure everyone understands. Don't take everything I'm saying and go think that that's legal advice. If this applies to you, you need to go look into it further, call an attorney, do some research. So, for example, in this law, there's a whole section on ADUs and junior ADUs that are not separate interests. What does a separate interest mean in quotations? Well, it's basically your interest in that property. If you own a property, you have a separate interest in that property. It's not a rental if the owner occupies the separate interest. If the owner lives on the property and then also rents it out, then it might not be a separate interest. Why does that matter? Well, then you might not be subject to this law. Again, I'm giving you a few examples at a high level of some carve-outs. So when you hear about this in a real general way, you could say, oh, maybe this doesn't apply to me, or maybe it doesn't apply to my neighbor or my neighborhood. Another big takeaway here, newly adopted rental prohibitions only bind future purchasers. I just spoke about that and why HOAs are moving forward. That's the Brown case. So Brown versus Montage at Mission Hills came out in August of 2020. Here's what happened. A person came into a neighborhood and bought a property solely to short-term rent it. No questions about it. They bought it, started short-term renting. The HOA said, we don't want short-term rentals in our neighborhood. They all met together, they amended their CC&R and their governing documents, no more short-term rentals. They went to the owner, they said, we got a new provision here, no more short-term rentals. The owner probably said, love what you've done here, great job, doesn't apply to me. I'm not going to stop. And they got in a fight, and they went to court, and that's this case. The HOA first argued that short-term rentals are commercial activities. different than long-term rentals, and therefore they shouldn't be subjected to this law, Civil Code 4741 that we just talked about. Court said, no, there's no distinction. We're not going to make a distinction saying that short-term renting is a commercial activity. We don't see that distinction. The second part, the HOA said, okay, our 30 days, it's not a prohibition, it's just a restriction. In other words, not that big of a deal. We shouldn't be subjected to this new statute. Court said, no, that's not going to work either. Ultimately, the court held that any kind of rental restriction or prohibition that did not exist when the owner bought the unit is not going to be applied against that owner. So, in other words, you pass new provisions in your CC&Rs, it's going to bind future purchasers, not your current owners. What does that mean? It means HOAs are all saying, we don't have short-term rental prohibitions on our books. We better get them on our books if we want them, because properties are selling fast, and each new person that comes in and buys it is not going to be subject to anything unless it's already on the books. All right, enough with housing. Let's jump back to the corporate world. We're talking about here agreements to settle a civil claim or administrative complaints and separation agreements with employees. This is Senate Bill 331. All right, what's the background here? Okay, so corporations, businesses operate, they employ lots of people, bad things happen. Things that shouldn't happen, happen. Then folks start talking about it. Ultimately, a lot of people gather into a conference room, and there's settlement agreements that get put up. Perhaps there's some consideration, there's some non-disclosures, there's some confidentiality. Folks sign their name on things saying they will or will not say things, and they try to close the door on these particular issues. The prior law said that you could not prevent disclosure of factual information related to allegations of sexual assault or sex-based harassment or discrimination in the workplace. They've now expanded that. And they're now saying there's this new set of laws and provisions that you need to have or cannot have inside separation agreements. In other words, the legislature's saying no secret settlements. So now, if you're going to have a settlement separation agreement, you need to include language allowing employees to disclose unlawful conduct. You can't include confidentiality provisions that would prohibit the disclosure of factual information related to any kind of workplace harassment or discrimination. So that's the extension here. Any kind of workplace harassment or discrimination can no longer be essentially swept under the rug. You need to provide employees with reasonable time. Here in this law, it talks about 5 or more business days for them to consult an attorney. And if they don't consult an attorney, even if they say, I don't want an attorney, you better make sure as the employer that they're signing that voluntarily, knowingly, and they're not induced by the employer. Now, that's just what the law says. What does it really mean? Well, if we think about this, again, taking it in context, those settlement agreements are signed, again, I just mentioned a conference room. You can imagine there's probably some people sitting in that room that might be intimidating to that employee. You need to make sure they get a fair chance. You got to make sure they have a chance to go get an attorney, talk to them confidentially, understand what they're signing. And if they don't, some of them won't. Maybe you're giving them a check or something of that nature where they're like, I just want to sign it. I'm good. I'm walking away. You better make sure that they voluntarily and knowingly waive their rights, because later on you might find yourself in litigation over that, and not only with that employee, but now you've violated a Senate bill that's now a California law, which is a bigger issue for you as the employer. This is just some sample language that you now need to have inside your Senate bills. This is exactly what I just talked about before. You just can't prevent folks from discussing or disclosing certain information about unlawful acts. Okay, back to housing. Sb9. There's been a lot talked about of Sb9 statewide law. Again, 2 important changes to the California law. It allows homeowners in most areas to divide their property into 2 lots, allows 2 homes to be built on each of those lots. What on earth does that mean? It means if you have a single family zoned parcel, you can now build a 4-plex as long as you go through Sb9. 2 parts here though, right? We're going to split the lot and then we're going to build 2 homes on each half of that lot. Each of those areas have different criteria that you need to make sure you can satisfy before you're allowed to do this. Why? Well, we want more homes, more homeowners, more chances for people to buy homes. So here's some criteria. I'm not going to go through all of these, and also this is not all of the criteria. Again, going back to when I'm talking about some of these laws, it's not everything you need to know. But what's important is that you can't use Sb9 to develop your property and to build unless you can meet all of these criteria. So for example, if you want to do a lot split, you need to make sure it's zoned for single family residence. You need to make sure it results in 2 lots of approximately equal size. Each lot needs to be at least 1,200 square feet. and you need to sign an affidavit that you intend to live in one of the units for at least 3 years unless you're exempt from that. And the folks that are exempt are something like a qualified nonprofit or a community land trust. Again, not all the criteria. Here's some criteria for 2-unit developments. If you want to build 2 units on one half of that lot, you can't tear down affordable housing or rent control housing to rebuild these. It needs to not be a historic landmark. You need to make sure you have off-street parking unless you're near a transit center. Obviously, that wouldn't work here in Truckee. We don't, at this time at least, you would need to have an off-street parking space. And then you cannot have short-term rentals if you build the unit under the SB9 framework. This is similar to the lot split. Again, not all the criteria. Why should you care? Well, the Turner Center at UC Berkeley says over 700,000 new homes that would otherwise not be market feasible are going to be built under SB9. What does it really mean? It just means you have a single-family residence, and now you can build a 4-plex. There's going to be more homes built. It's going to increase the amount of 4 units, 3 units, anything in between. And I should say, it doesn't mean you only have to have 1 or 4. You can go in between. The idea here is parcels that could only be market feasible or only built a certain way are now going to change under SB9. Probably the biggest factor here is ministerial review. What does that mean? It means no discretionary review or hearings. What does that mean? It means essentially if you meet all the criteria and you apply for a permit, you're going to be approved. You have to be approved. If you meet all the criteria and file a permit to build, again, in the town of Truckee, or let's say in Placer County, they think, and this is particularly applicable here with Tony speaking next, let's say they think it's a fire hazard. They cannot deny it on those grounds, because this is a statewide law. Let's just say you have all single-family houses in your neighborhood. You don't want a 4-plex going up down the street. That's not a reason for the town of Truckee or Placer County or those types of entities to deny that permit application. And there won't be a hearing. They're not going to have a public hearing. This is a ministerial review. Again, you do have to meet all the criteria. Keep that in mind. So it's not incredibly easy, but no discretionary review or hearings. The big takeaway here is, once again, we're at the HOA level. Nothing in SB9 says that HOAs can't preclude this type of development. So if this affects you, if this affects your community, if this is important to you, you go to your HOA level. Placer County, Town of Truckee, and those types of entities, they can't deny it. It's statewide law, but it doesn't mean you can't have restrictive covenants or those types of provisions inside your governing documents that preclude that type of building in your neighborhood. Again, why we're seeing HOAs move forward. They see SB9, they're talking to attorneys, they're reading things on the internet, they're realizing maybe we should make some changes to our governing documents. Okay, lastly here, mental health in schools. You now need to have curriculum as part of the health education course throughout the state of California for mental health. Proposition 12, the Bacon Law. This again was a voter-backed initiative from 2018. The idea was in California, the voters said, we want to buy certain products at grocery stores that we know are coming from farms where the animals are not being treated inhumanely. That was the whole idea behind it. The first deadline was in January 2020, and egg-laying hens need to have more space at that point in time. And now the second deadline in January 2022, egg-laying hens now must be cage-free. Breeding pigs must have 24 square feet each. Now, what's happened, not a big surprise, at least not to me, lawsuits. So the California Grocery Association and Restaurant Association sued in Superior Court of Sacramento and said, can't enforce this, Your Honor. It's not being implemented the way it is. It got passed in 2018 by the voters. We're now in 2022. We're not ready for this. What they essentially said was, we're not ready to certify that the eggs and the pork and the other products that are being sold in California are actually coming from places that meet the standards of inhumane conditions. Therefore, we need 28 months to get it going. Some argued, well, they did argue, that it's already been 4 years. They said they needed another 28 months. The judge said, I'll give you 6 months. That was in January of 2022, so right now we're in a grace period where it's not being enforced. They're having 6 more months. As most laws that I talked about here today, there's a lot of publicity. There's a lot of statements saying that this type of law will kill the whole pork industry. It's shook it up so much, it's going to cause pricing to go up, it's going to cause supply to go down. That's part of the arguments going forward. But at this point in time, now you know what's going on with breeding pigs and needing 24 square feet, and that there's a hold on it for at least 6 months from January 2022. That's all I got today. I hope it was informative. Maybe you actually learned something. I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
questions?
I got one for you. With AB5, the workforce one, how does that correlate with, because I know in Truckee we have a lot of companies that do out-of-state construction here. So if we have a company from Nevada coming up here with freelance workers, is it in the state they're working in or where they're based out of?
Sure. So the question was under AB5, is where the worker works or where they're based out of? Excuse me, maybe I said that wrong. Is it where the company's based out of or where the worker's based out of?
A little bit of both, actually.
Right.
I'm curious as to how that goes.
So both ways. Really, again, it kind of comes down to the specific circumstances of what's going on, because you could get in the argument of, well, he or she, the employee that is, lives in Nevada but does only 25% of their jobs, 35% we could get down there. And generally speaking, if you're going to operate in California, you're under California law. So you can go incorporate anywhere you want, but if you're going to have workers here and you're going to make money here, you're going to be subject to AB5. That's really what it comes down to. Again, though, it's kind of about checking the boxes and just making sure you're handling it appropriately. And if you have those issues, I mentioned before in one of my slides, like audit your relationships. If you have someone in that situation, think about it yourself and then maybe talk with that person and just figure it out so it doesn't become an issue where someone needs to go make a complaint with the state. And you kind of figure out what's going on here to try to navigate that law. That's at least the best advice I can give, kind of before things escalate. Actually handle it and deal with it so you're on the right page, so it doesn't surprise you. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Regarding the Brown case, what was the logic the court used to determine that short-term rentals weren't a commercial enterprise?
I actually don't know that specific answer, but I'm happy to look it up because I'm sure they had a background of it. I kind of did a summary. I know that that was a big issue. So I'm happy to look that one up and kind of let you know later, but I don't know the specific reason why they made that distinction. And I violated the rules. I had to repeat the question. The question was, in the Brown case, what was the specific reasoning the court used to not make the distinction between short-term rentals and long-term renting, and saying that short-term renting was not a commercial activity? And I just don't know those specific facts, but I'm happy to look it up. I think it's an interesting question, but I just didn't have that ready for today. Anything else, Ernie?
Yeah, a number of our homes in this community are on septic. And the septic systems are so old, there was no way to put an ADU on those lots. Is there any mechanism that the town could exercise, or the individual, to require the sanitation district to start employing a sewer system, or expanding the sewer system, so that we can have more ADUs?
So the question was whether the town of Truckee has any mechanisms to employ to start requiring a sewer system, because a lot of properties here are on septic and they can't have an ADU because of the septic. I think it's a great question. It's unfortunately something that I really can't answer. It's something for the town of Truckee to answer, really, with their relationships and their ordinances and codes. Can they, require any type of sewer? It seems probably difficult to require it, but I think the general concept and the discussion should be made, because obviously the idea is here, we want to put more ADUs, we want to put more homes, but we're precluded from doing that because of septic. Well, then how do we get off septic? Unfortunately, I'm not aware of any specific way they could demand or require sewer, but I think that's actually a question more appropriate for the town of Truckee employees or in its attorney.
Related to that, is there language in Sb9 that deals with lack of sewer hookup, lack of water availability? What if there's a finite number of water hookups and they're allocated to existing lots?
Yeah, so it kind of, and again, I was giving a high level, but yeah, it does dig down into, you can make certain, the question was, does SB9 essentially have specifics in it where, if you can't do water hookup, if you can't do certain types of items, then you can't go build a fourplex? And I think the question kind of goes towards, can you still meet the criteria in those specific situations? It does dig down into allowing some government regulations in some areas. I was kind of giving some wide, high examples of why this law is important and why people are talking, some like it and some don't. But yes, you can dig down to there. There are some restrictions that Placer County and Town of Truckee can do. But the general idea here and what I wanted to, bring forth and let everyone know if you weren't already aware about it is they do have this criteria, and if you can meet it, more likely than not, you're going to be able to take a single family property and now build a fourplex. I think on that point, and I'm not the best person to speak on this, but I have listened enough to what's going on and what the town has been saying about it and what other local entities have been saying about it. I don't think they think it's going to be a huge issue here. There's just doesn't make a lot of sense. First off, we have special zoning here. We're a rural area, so we have different types of zoning. Keep in mind, you have to have single family resident zoning for this type of building. The other part is economics. So I don't think it really works out sometimes to build in that area. I think I'm about out of time. Hey, thanks for the questions. If I wasn't able to answer it, I'll do my best to follow up with you, okay?
That was really good. Ethan, I'll throw in a follow-up comment on AB5. It's common around here for a contractor to hire a framing contractor that is licensed. So you get a licensed contractor and he wants to frame the house. And so the general hires him, pays him a 1099. No, I can't do that. Haven't been able to do that for a long time because they're in the same trade. Anytime you're hiring somebody that's in the same business you are, you can't 1099. The classic example, just would drive me nuts, is the fly fisherman. He has a little company. Somebody wants to get a guided trip, and he says, okay, you go with Joe, and he gets paid 1099. No, he's in fly fishing business. He has to be your employee, which of course doesn't work. So, and there's 1,000 examples like that. So this AB5 independent contractor is a nightmare. And what's scary is that if you pay an employee or a worker that should be an employee and you give them a 1099, they own you because you wrongly deprived them of all the unemployment and all the other benefits an employee gets. So it's scary stuff for employers. So talk to a lawyer about that. In fact, there's one right there in the room. So, all right, thank you, Ethan. So next speaker, equally as interesting. He's sitting right over there, primed, ready to go, drove in here from Sierraville. Saw Ted on his porch in his pajamas coming in. So we know the fire season is here and it gets worse every year. We're already seeing fires, which is incredible. It's a growing problem for people that live in areas like ours, and the risk is high. Getting fire insurance in your home is not easy. I can attest to that. I was canceled. They didn't even come out and look. They didn't care. I mean, I've probably spent over $10,000 in defensible space. So they go, well, they don't even shrug their shoulders. They don't care. No insurance. So I get CAL FIRE, which we're going to hear about, and I don't know, I'm paying something like $7,000 for my house. It's just all packaged up. So, Tony, can you beat that? Anyway, so Tony Commendatore is North Tahoe Regional President of Aegis Insurance Markets, and he's up here to tell us what we can do. Thanks, Tony.
All right. Well, first of all, I don't come bearing good news. I actually debated about doing this thing because the reality is the market's tough, and there's a belief that it's easy to focus on one thing, wildfires. It's the belief that insurance companies are just, taking advantage of a situation. There's all these different beliefs that are happening. Everybody wants answers of what they can do and how to get insurance. Well, so what I decided to do is I'm going to kind of just give a basic overview. I know we're slotted for 25 minutes plus 5 minutes of questions. I could talk forever, but when you're bringing bad news, I'm just going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to give you opportunity to ask questions. So basically, here's kind of the deal. First of all, we have to understand what's affecting, why insurance, these things are happening, and it's a supply-demand thing, just like the other supply-demand stuff we have in our current society, right? So insurance companies are in business to make money. The California Fair Plan is a business that's not really, I'll call it a bureaucratic nonprofit type of a business that's not really in it to make money. As you can see, rates are going up dramatically there as well. So what are the things that are impacting our rates, and why are we having these problems? Well, a couple things are happening, and this is very high level. It's not, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but I want to leave you with something so you know where you're at. And at the end of the day, hopefully in time you can do things to help yourself, your community, our state, our country as we work through these situations. And quite honestly, it's global. So a couple things are happening. So one of the things that we all know, if you ever had a house and you've had it for some length of time, you bought insurance. So let's just give a scenario. You bought insurance for a house that you bought in, say, 2010. The housing cost was a certain price at that point. Building cost was a certain price at that point. You had a value of your house. And let's just say you're using $250 a square foot. And that's what you did. And you called your insurance agent, no matter who you were with, and you went out and said, it cost me $250 a square foot, and I need a replacement cost for that amount, and time goes on. Well, there's mechanisms in place to help kind of keep that going up as inflation has happened, as values have gone up. But the market is based on everybody insuring everything equal to kind of spread the pool out, right? So you have, let's just use 10,000 homes. If they all are priced at $250 a square foot, and pricing per square foot went up to $400 a foot, or $500 a foot, or $600 a foot, as we're starting to see now in Truckee as a standard home, you're undervalued. So buildings are undervalued, and it's not putting enough capital or therefore premium into the marketplace. It's a very important part of the insurance industry, is to collect enough premium based off the values that they're insuring. So as you go through your renewal every single year, it's important to make sure you're adjusting for your value with the changes in prices. Don't expect your insurance agent just to do it. It'd be nice if they all did. It does benefit them if their values are going up. Of course, they're getting higher commissions, but the reality is the system is built in as kind of an automatic renewal system. It just happens. And unless you're paying attention, unless your agent's paying attention, who may have 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 clients, it's hard to do that. Do it on your own. Pay attention. Do what you can do to make sure your value is correct. The downside to that was everyone's going to say, well, my premiums just went up because I raised the value of my home. But if you want to play in the game and play it correctly and have the best opportunity to make sure your house is insured correctly, deal with your building value. So the impact of that over time, if everybody's undervalued, not enough capital, major catastrophes happen, not enough premium out there to collect that capital, therefore, it's harder to pay. Insurance companies are in business to make a profit, not lose money. You can see where it's kind of going. It's undervalued. The other big thing, which we're all talking about in our society right now, inflation. Inflation is both obviously in the cost of housing, which we just talked about, but inflation of building materials, inflation of cost of labor, inflation of all these different parts of a home in the event of a claim that happens. So let's just use an example in the last year or so. You have a claim on your house. Maybe we had a windstorm like we did yesterday from a freak storm, a log falls on your roof, and suddenly now you have roof damage. First of all, you have a problem getting people out there, getting this handled, the claim gets filed, you got to get a contractor out there, these things are moving along very slowly. And while this is happening, inflation's continuing to go on. So the insurance company comes in to figure out that the value of the repair of your home is, let's just say it was a pretty big damage to your roofing system, and it's to be $100,000. And you agree that that sounds pretty good, but say it's February and there's still snow on the ground. It's not easy to get it out there. It's not leaking, but it's enough to kind of get through until the summer. Now you got to go find a contractor to come out and do it. You have lumber costs going up because it's in the middle of the building season. These things are starting to happen. And so whatever you just agreed on, $100,000, say in February, and by the time it can actually get done, it's now October. And you had some inflation, and that price difference, maybe it was only $5,000, but multiplied it over multiple claims for an insurance carrier who don't build that into their system, and you have higher costs. So this all goes back to collecting enough premium, and the reason why it's important is if the market is not designed to handle the cost of insuring basically homes or whatever the item is, they need to find ways to collect capital, collect money, or increase your premiums. And that's really where it kind of comes down to. So those are a couple things that are really affecting the pricing and housing, insurance in the housing world. And this would probably apply to all commercial properties as well. Part of when these pricings happening, they're using different models over time. Insurance companies, just like any other business, likes predictability. That's how they're building the pricing into it. And if it's not predictable, then they have to figure out, okay, how do you price for that? And then you have what you have here in California and other states where you have a very random. It feels like you're almost throwing a dart at a dartboard with your eyes closed to see what kind of price you're going to get this week, maybe this hour. Sometimes it happens that way. So models are used to predict the future, predict things based off the past. And what we're having now with wildland fires, we're having with other types of catastrophes throughout the United States, such as a freeze in Texas. You're having some wildland fires in the Carolinas that are forecast, and those are not normal things. You're having other natural disasters that are happening over and over and over again at a higher frequency rate with higher dollars. It throws off the predictability. And insurance companies, again, are in business to make money, and therefore when they can't collect enough premium, then they don't know what the predictability is. It gets very difficult, and then you have volatility in the market. So speaking of frequency of kind of some losses, kind of give you as an example. In 2021, there were 20 separate $1 billion incidences in the United States. That's a pretty big number. That's significantly higher than years past, where it might have been from 5 to 10 billion, 5 to 10 $1 billion incidences across the United States. In Florida alone, I'm going to use Florida as an example, and the reason why I'm using across the country is because all these things factor into it. But in Florida, in 2017, had about $88 million in net losses in the claims they had through hurricanes. In 2020, they had $816 million in net losses. And net losses are based, it's a number that's used in the industry because obviously there's gross losses and then they have ways to put money back into it. It's a net loss of the companies at the end of the day. So companies lost $816 million. In 2021, for the first 9 months, it was at, when this study was done, was at $850 million. So the numbers keep going up. Insurance companies are still battling this. Part of our industry is supposed to insure for wildland fire here, earthquake here, hurricanes here, whatever the issue are regionally. And I think that's noble, but the reality is it's a big company. They have a bottom line, and they'll never want to say that a hurricane will affect California rates and fire will never affect Florida rates, but it happens because at the end of the day, there's still a bottom line. So as these things continue to happen, where are we going? What can we do? What are the things? What are the carriers doing about this? Well, as you see, many carriers are pulling out, getting less and less carriers. So now the demand is high. The ability to fill demand is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and so it gets more difficult. The FAIR plan has moved in to become how do I say this? In the past, it was a marketplace that was like for the extreme, like these are markets or these are properties that we can't insure. And then there was this market in between called excess surplus lines, and we'd fill the market with that. And then our standard markets are Allstates, our Farmers, our Hartford, our Travelers. Those would be your standard markets. Well, those standard markets are getting really small. That excess surplus lines took on the markets originally, and those are getting really small. And the California FAIR plan is what's becoming left. And that's becoming a primary place for insurance, and unfortunately, where we go. $7,000 sounds like a lot of money, and it is if you're paying $1,500 about 5, 6, 7 years ago. But it's becoming a normal. It's the new normal for now, at least. Insurance companies, the industry is based off of risk and spreading risk. And so when you have these markets and what they're trying to do and carriers are trying to resolve this, goes back to reinsurance. So if you're currently with, it doesn't matter which company, say you're with the Hartford, and the Hartford is out there insuring, I don't know, $50 million in properties. They have insurance on those policies to insure themselves. It's called reinsurance. And the whole market is built on spreading risk, that if a major catastrophe should happen, it spreads it around across the board, that not one carrier or one group of people are going to be taken out by a loss. So reinsurance companies are very small in numbers, most of them may be based out of London, and they are driving a lot of the marketplace. So I believe, I use Jim as an example, he has his house, he's had his insurance for a number of years. The marketplace comes in, they're saying, well, we're not going to insure you. We don't care that you did $10,000 worth of defensible space. We don't care anything, because what they're looking at is capacity. So what you have capacity is you have a bucket. And a bucket of how much money that carrier or that reinsurance company is willing to risk in a certain area. And the areas can be micro, like maybe like 96161 or zip code. It could be much more broad, maybe the Sierras or the Eastern Sierras. It could be statewide, but generally speaking, they try and narrow it down to a zip code or even more of a community, or sometimes even down to a street. But once the bucket's full, the bucket is full. And so therefore you have a limited capacity. And then that first thing we were talking about, increasing values, although the number of houses didn't change, but our values in the last couple of years and building costs has probably close to doubled from what it was. So if you're at $250 to $300 a foot 3 years ago, and now you're at $500 to $600 a foot, not any more houses there, but their volume is much higher in dollars, and it filled that bucket much more quickly, right? So that's another factor into this whole thing. Where that goes, it's going to go back to capacity, it's going to go back to reinsurance companies finding ways to make markets, expand their markets. I don't know, I have a lot of hope in that right now. It's only so much capital, so much risk insurance companies are willing to do. So I have a few notes here, and I was kind of, it's like, people call and ask, what can we do? What are our options? What do we do next? And that's why I debated about coming up here and bringing this news, is that there really is not a lot of good news in the near future. The market's continuing to harden, which means as hardens, prices go up, premiums go up. It's not a good situation. The California Fair Plan will probably continue to be a main driver. Carriers to get involved, to come into the marketplace, because many people say, well, there's an opportunity now. Because obviously, if no one wants to be the Fair Plan, it does its job. It satisfies some insurance for maybe your lender, for yourself, but there's some limitations to it. It's not the best policy in the world. Why not have more carriers come in? Well, it goes back to these other issues. Experience, understanding how to mitigate losses. You have various California codes and laws and regulations you have to follow. At the end of the day, reinsurance goes back to reinsurance. If there's only this much capacity, you're going to limit the number of people who can get back in the game. So moving forward, I think a few things you can do. There's things that happen in the industry that are changing. Firewise is one of them that's happening, but it's going to be slow to respond for the insurance companies. Just because, I'll use Jim again, Jim did a great job of clearing defensible space around his house. What we're seeing in these fires is that they're kind of a rolling flame, huge wall of flame coming down a hill or up a hill or whatever way the wind's driving it, and it's reaching out. It's blowing embers out into the forward part, and then it creates its own little vacuum system. And as it does that, it's creating more of a firewall going down the hill or up the hill or wherever it heads. And Jim did a great job, but the embers are still going to land in his area. It still may burn around him. His house is still exposed because of all the neighboring houses, all the neighboring forests. Fuels are a big piece of that. So a community of Truckee, a community in the mountains, the things you can do. continue to do the Firewise. If your community is not part of Firewise, if your neighborhood's not part of Firewise, do it. It's not going to solve the problem today, but it'll get better as it goes along. Support what you can do for your town and your county and CAL FIRE and other organizations to help clear fuels. Fuels are the major cause here. We can talk about global warming, we can talk about all the other things that happen. At the end of the day, if there's nothing to burn, it reduces our risk. So I'm going to give an example. Some of you may remember I was on town council for a short little stint, and we had started a plan that went through the town that was cutting back, I believe it was 10 feet from the roadside through Tawadana is where we started, and pushing back, create a better egress system in the event of a wildland fire for safety. And we cut back a lot of trees and brush. And that wasn't such a big deal when it was in Tawadana, but it went into the other neighborhoods over the last year or so, it became a much bigger deal. While I understand that we don't want to cut trees down and you have a certain beautification to your neighborhood, the reality is it goes back to fuels. It goes back to creating the egress, creating places that are safe for humans to live in our changing environment. And we have to do the things, and we have to take action on our own in order to come up with solutions. If we're going to wait for the state by itself, we're going to wait a long time. So we have to start here in our community. You have to start at your house, do the things you can do, and be supportive of those actions. They're not always going to look the best, but they're part of living here. Also, pushing the commissioner. The commissioner drives a lot of what happens out there in regulation. So a couple things have happened in the California Fair Plan. When the California Fair Plan became one of the prime areas for insurance for homeowners, we went down a road of at a $1.5 million valuation was the most a policy would pay, and we had to increase that to $3 million. The commissioner was able to do that. That became by being pressured by the communities out there. Commercial insurance is now up to $8.4 million, I believe, is what those insure for a commercial property within the FAIR plan. But when our values are growing so quickly because the cost of building, it becomes much more difficult. So those numbers will probably have to be adjusted again in the future. Those are a few things you can do. Having an agent, I used to push that having a local agent was really important, and I still believe that. The problem with it is that we're all playing with the same pool, and it's very small. And so I think over time, your agent relationship is going to go to being involved with larger agencies, which kills me to say as an independent. But if you're dealing with the smaller shop that's one or two people, it gets very difficult finding market space because there is only so much market space, and they're going to start building relationships out there. So pay attention to who you're working with. Established agencies is always a great way to go. There's some other factors in there that I don't understand. I'll use State Farm as an example. I personally, it's killed me from an ego standpoint, but I had to insure my house, and the only place I could find was the California Fair Plan, and I was paying $9,000 at the end of the day, and it was killing me. And I decided to eat my pride. I called State Farm, a local agent, and lo and behold, they were able to do my house up in Sierraville for much less money. The point is that there's little diamonds in the rough. Pay attention. Reach out to different agents during different times. State Farm locally has been able to do it here and there, and other times not at all. Farmers has done the same. Allstate's been out of the game for quite a while up here. So different carriers are changing, but then as capacity comes back and they have some room, they will open the door again. Your independent agents are going to be working with multiple carriers, and when those doors open, they will change and they'll have options. I think those are some of the main things I want to hit. I have Cindy Hoyt, who is one of my agents. She's also on the call here on Zoom. I don't know, Cindy, if you had anything that you wanted to add to from a personal lines agent selling insurance to the homeowners.
Hello. The main thing I would say is get your policies out And review your coverages. Like the biggest thing is if you are going to be paying these higher premiums, you don't want to be underinsured. So I think because of the building costs going up so high the last couple of years, that that would be my number one suggestion, is to review the coverages and then maybe see where you can adjust by increasing your deductible. Maybe you don't need as much personal property coverage, but making sure that your dwelling, your home is adequately insured.
Yeah, and I'll add to Cindy's comment there. Finding ways to self-insure, insure things that are important. Higher deductibles is really a big piece of that. That's probably part of the future. We're probably going to have different deductibles for different parts of the coverages. Maybe there'll be something within wildland fire, sort of similar to the earthquake authority that's out there. This is a growing, changing problem, and I don't really know the future will hold, but ideas are being thrown out there, and I think in time it will come together, but it might take a few years. So, do you have any questions, anybody?
What's the California Fair Plan?
So the question is, what's the California Fair Plan? So I'll give you the best answer I can. The California Fair Plan was derived to create a place for homes to be placed with insurance in areas where the average carrier, standard carriers, did not want to insure. So if you had a high-risk area, maybe you're out in Frog Lake, maybe you're up by Jackson Meadows and you're way off the grid. Some of these areas that are very difficult to both provide fire suppression, they're off there's no water supplies, whatever it might be, were areas that this program was designed for. In time, as we see now it's on Glenshire Drive. I mean, it's everywhere, so.
But is it a state agency or is it a consortium of something?
So it's a state-run bureaucratic kind of group of regulators that create a program that are reinsured through individual insurance companies, but it's on their paper. So they kind of pay into this to help create a program to be able to play in the state of California. They create the California Fair Plan. So an example that people are more familiar with would be in order to sell an auto insurance in California, there's a group of high-risk people who can't get insurance, and all carriers must participate in that and provide insurance for that. But it's a small percentage, it's limited, so they spread the risk amongst themselves to insure this group of people in order to insure the mass of people. Same idea with the homes. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
So it's interesting, we have,
Try this.
no, I don't get to shout.
Nice.
Shoot. In the previous talk about ways to get more houses built, because we have a house shortage, bumping up straight against we can't get insurance. So I guess there's nothing to ask, it's just interesting observation.
It's a battle. It's like we want more housing, but it's not easy to get, and it's very expensive, and it's getting more complicated. Yes.
Just a thought. Because I live in Prosser Lakeview. We have septic, and there's a lot of talk about trying to get sewers in there. It's going to cost about $125,000 over that time. You know, they brought up some numbers. But just a thought, if you take like the last couple communities in Truckee that are on septic that are actually affordable for business owners like me to live there, and you pop another $125,000 in another 5 years, it could be another $200,000 just to bring in ADU units for people to rent. You're going to knock out all the rest of the business owners and all the rest of the workers here just to put in sewers to make ADU units. And to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense to put in a sewer in a community that's local, basically local, and your local workers, and drive them out to put ADU units on it. Just a thought that I just wanted to share.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Just one quick one that came in. And what are current average per square foot building costs in Truckee? Do you know that?
Well, I'll give you what we've been using, and then Cindy may have a different opinion on this a little bit because it is a moving target. I think pretty much the standard is your standard average Truckee home, probably $500 a foot is kind of the going rate right now. It could easily go up from there. And when I say standard, I'm talking, your 3.2. I don't even know if anyone builds them anymore. But your 3.2, that's kind of in the Glenshire area. Pretty simple building. Yes.
Are you seeing people call you to increase their coverage, and are they having any trouble getting that? Because again, the increase in value of the homes. Repeat the question.
So the question was, are people calling us to increase their insurance rate or insurance value on their homes, and are they having trouble getting that? Did I kind of catch your question? Cindy, I'll let you answer that question if you know off the top of your head. I know my answer, but.
Yes, they are, of course. And if we are with the FAIR plan and if we are over $1.5 million total insured value, there are some items that we need to do. We need to do an updated replacement cost estimator, send in new photos, and we can usually get it approved. There is just a little bit of a process for that. But I haven't really seen any declinations on increasing dwelling coverages with whatever carrier we're going to.
So I think I will end it on that. And I'm sorry to bring the dark, gloomy news, but hang in there, do the best you can, and there'll be sunnier days.
Notice he slips in, there'll be sunnier days, yeah. Let's hold our breath. And I'll add one thing. There's a recent case that verified what Tony said, is that where the agent and the owner weren't paying attention and the house burned down, the replacement value was, $200 a square foot or something, and it cost 3 times that to build. The owner sued the agent, say, you didn't tell me, you didn't adjust my policy, and the agent won and the homeowner lost, which I think is sort of predictable. So the point is, look at your policy, be realistic about what it would cost to rebuild if you had a fire. And one thing I wasn't sure about is I always thought you could save the foundation, but apparently in a fire that's not the case. So you demo the foundation and put it in. So I was thinking maybe I could have less coverage, but that didn't work either. So, all right. Anybody have any? Well, thank you both. Great topics, great reviews. California Fair Plan is the only game in town if you can't get a policy. Is that sort of bottom line? Okay, yeah. All right. And it has limits. It doesn't cover everything a normal policy covers. So talk to your agent about that. Anybody have any announcements? I know. Okay, right there.
Hold on. Here.
Here comes the microphone.
Wow, I haven't had a microphone since I was in high school. Okay, so my name is, do you guys want me to stand? I don't know which camera do I look at for this? There's like 4D coverage here. Behind me. Okay, hi. So my name is Kevin Tomlin. I'm with Sierra Community House, and I am under a program called Close to Home, which is provided to us by CDPH. I'm with my co-facilitator, Ciela. And we are outreach organizers within the community thing that we're doing. And what we are here to talk with you guys about today, I put it on all your tables. People on Zoom, check your mail. I'm kidding. Don't actually check your mail. Stay here. It's on your tables. And what this is a art contest that we are offering to the community. We paired with a bunch of volunteers from the area to talk about what they saw as one of the biggest issues in the community. And one of the big ones was a lack of understanding or knowledge of what resources to go to. And of course, Sierra Community House is very well known. Very biased when I say that, but something that they wanted to target was Truckee, Tahoe being a community or a tourist area, and the opportunity to take this nationwide. They elected on using 211, which is a national number. It's a very important number in California as well. If you don't know it, I encourage you to Google it and learn about it. The things that they do are amazing. They do what Sierra Community House does and more, and they can provide you with resources such as Sierra Community House, but on a nationwide and statewide level. And so our art contest that we are putting up is going to be starting on the 18th of April until May 9th. And the purpose of it is for the community to visualize what support looks like and how to put it on a sticker. And the purpose of the sticker is to spread it around so that we can spread awareness so that people can look at it, they can see what that is, and then they have that in the back of their head when they need to go somewhere. And so it's just a raise an awareness on what resources are available, how to go about those resources, and hopefully make violence of any way, shape, or form something of the past.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for what you do, too. Anybody else? Lynn?
The Chamber is putting on a really fun event, April 26, 5:30 to 7:30 here at Town Hall. It's one of our Big Life Connections events, and it's an evening with Scott Thompson, who's a local photographer who happens to be on the Zoom. He has shot all over the place, Truckee, Tahoe, all over. He's going to share a little bit about himself, how he came to Truckee and Tahoe, and some of his favorite places to shoot, and share some of his amazing images. So go to truckee.com if you're interested in attending. It's free, and you'll find a link there to register.
Great. Sounds good. Anybody else? Okay, so we're going to resume after 2 years our famous raffle. Somebody raise your hand. So, all right, first prize is Wild Cherry's gift certificate. And we have a trusty person here. Why don't you pull 3 out? Okay. So the winner of the Wild Cherry certificate is 529806. All right, great. And we have a return ticket to Good Morning Truckee, invaluable, absolutely invaluable, 529807. Oh, Kevin. The back row is winning everything. Is this rigged, Lynn? And the last one is a 25 gift certificate or gift card for Grizzly Menswear, which is a really cool shop. That's the one out by Rayleigh's, right? Yeah, that's a nice place. Okay, the winner is 529811. Oh, that's mine. No. All right, right here. Good. Yeah, you got it.
There you go.
So that's it. We'll see you next month. And see, I will be traveling in Alaska, I think, if all goes well. So Raven Whittington will be here, and if anybody has a little extra time, you could help us break down the room, okay, for the council meeting tonight. Thank you all. Bye.